This is Wade Randolph. They call me the More Guy. So welcome to the first show of Elevate. Now you're saying, Wade, why would you name a show Elevate? Because now in this new normal, what I tend to tell people, pivot doesn't do it. See, if you take a pivot, hear me with it, take a small pivot. If you take a pivot, then that's just a small move. But in this new normal, I think we have to elevate our thinking, our actions, and our skills to a new level. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Elevate, our first show that will give you insight of how to elevate your talents, your skills, and your abilities to a new level. And this is a show that you don't want to miss. So I might invite you, let's just do old school for a moment. If you can grab your pad, that's good. But if you can grab a pencil and paper, you don't want to miss this show. Now you're saying, wait, why do you say that? Because on this show, I have someone that can elevate you to another level. See, this person in 1999, beyond 2,000 people won the 1999 World Championship of Public Speaking. But that's not enough. Didn't I tell you we're going to elevate? In his background, Les Brown, one of the top speakers in the world, always says that this gentleman is one of the best speakers to train people throughout the world and even here in the U.S. But let's go further. Knowing him, they say that he's Mr. Nuts and Bolts of public speaking. And a few people I asked, why do you call him that? Because this gentleman has the ability to take a presentation that's dull and turn it into dynamic. So please help me welcome my friend, mentor, and teacher, Mr. Craig Valentine. Craig, how are you?
Wade, I'm doing fantastic. And I got to tell you, I probably shouldn't tell you this because it might go to your head, but yeah, you elevated me. You elevated me. You took my career to another level because back in 1999, as you just mentioned, I won the world championship. But several months later, I got a phone call and I picked it up. And you remember, and he said, Craig, this is Wade Randolph, and I would like you to coach me on my speech. And I said, Wade, I'm not a speech coach. I'm just a speaker. I wouldn't even know where to start. You said, I'll pay you. I said, that's a good place to start. And so I remember we met at the Martin Luther King Library in Washington, D.C. You came up from Virginia and I coached you. And I had no idea what I was doing. I really didn't. But for some reason, you kept coming back. And as you came back, I started figuring out more tools and more concepts that could help you in your presentation. And then I guess word got out and I started getting more clients and I figured out more tools, more concepts, more processes. And eventually, a few years later, I still just saw myself as a speaker. A good friend of mine, Darren LaCroix, said, Craig, the moment you see yourself not only as a speaker, but also as a speech coach, is the moment things will open up for you. And that's exactly what happened. So one day I sat there, I said, you know what? I am a speech coach as well, thanks to Wade Randolph. And when I made that decision, Wade, the whole world was my oyster. It just opened up for me. So the advice I give people nowadays is, jump into what you fall into. Jump into what you fall into because there's a reason you fell. So I want to thank you, my friend, for helping me find that other part of my calling. And I appreciate you.
Well, you know, Craig, I have to tell you, that was what, over 20 years ago. We both had a little hair at that time. But you opened the door for me because there are a lot of coaches that I talk with. But you were so insightful, you were so gracious, and you were so open to say, yeah, I can see something in you that no one else saw. See, you saw that door before I saw it, and a good coach can see the future before you see it and help you step to it. So, man, this Wade Randolph that you hear, this Wade Randolph on the other side of the camera is only here because of you. So I want to say publicly thank you because you have changed my life and my thinking.
You're very welcome. I guess we had some reciprocity going on. We elevated each other.
Yeah, but can I talk to you about that drive you used to make me make over 100 miles up to see? But, you know, Craig, I always say from your training and from us talking, because we've talked quite a few times, you became the world champion of public speaking. And I always tell people, there comes two things. You must have a mindset and a skill set. What was your mindset? Because I've seen a lot of people try to win that and they just didn't, not because they didn't have the skills, they didn't have the mindset. What mindset do you have to compete at that level?
I always tell people the skill set without the mindset will keep you upset, right? The skill set without the mindset will keep you upset. So the mindset I had back then in the contest was to touch lives. It was to touch lives. It wasn't to win a trophy. It was to touch lives. In fact, Wade, every time I would win at the club level and then the area level, and then, you go to the district level or division level and district level, every time I would win a contest, I would get a trophy. But people also would come up to me and pat me on the back and so forth. But I never forget, there would always be somebody who said, "Great job, man. You're going to win the next one." And first of all, like, just let me enjoy this one. Right. But I would always say to them, even back in 1999, I don't know. I just want to touch lives. I just want to touch lives. And I tell people today, every time I reached out my hand to touch a life, somebody put a trophy in it. Right. But here's the key. Wade, I didn't reach for the trophy. I reached for the life. And I think you can see people on stage who are just reaching for the trophy. And it comes across to the audience in that way. And then you can see other people who are on stage and you realize they're really trying to touch my life. They're trying to elevate me. So one of the questions I ask people to get them into the right mindset when they're competing is, what are you reaching for? What are you reaching for? And so that can get them into the right mindset, because if they're reaching to touch a life, they're going to get rewarded beyond measure. But you're right. The skill set without the mindset will keep you upset.
Now, Craig, let me make an important point, because of you, I do coaching itself. Let me make sure, is it about the money or is it about reaching to help people succeed? What do you think makes a successful speaker? Money or reaching for something else?
Well, I think you want to reach, as a speaker, you want to reach your audience and you want to touch lives and you want to give them a message that can not only be remembered, which is a mistake that a lot of speakers make. You want to give them a message that can be repeated, right? So that it can be spread, so that it can touch more people. They say, what did the speaker talk about? Oh, he said, don't get ready, stay ready. He said, your dream is not for sale. He said this and that, things that are going to stick with them. And if you get those type of outcomes, you're going to automatically get the income. That's just the way it works. So if you're reaching them for the money, chances are you're going to do anything you can, and it might not be on purpose. It might not be your calling. But if you reach to touch lives, like I just said, you're going to be rewarded. So look, I speak for free every now and then, but I expect to generate income based off of the impact that I'm having on my audience. So I'm not a charity. Right. I'm not doing this completely for free, but I am doing this to touch lives first, and then the income will come automatically. And I truly believe that, and I've lived it for 23 years.
Yeah, I always say, and I may have gotten this from you or someone that says, impact drives your income. So the more you can impact the audience, the income will follow. You've been doing this speaking thing for over 20 years. So let me just nudge you for a moment. Why didn't you say...
Legacy.
I'm almost scared to ask this question. You've been successful 20 years. Why didn't you say, well, I've done this. I've achieved this goal. Why don't I just hang up my shingle? I'm done. Let me look for a new plateau.
Well, this is still my calling. This is still what I want to do. And it's changed forms. That's the one interesting thing about this whole journey I've been on. People say, stay in your lane. But they don't realize that sometimes the road curves, right? Just like it curved with you. I thought I was a speaker. Then I found out I was a speech coach. And then here's the thing that I tell people about building their business. You want to let the market drive your message, right? So people started coming to me and they would see me speak and they would say, wow, you're really good. I love your stories. Can you teach me how to do that? And then I put together right here, storytelling home study course for speakers, right? Of course, everything is online now, but I created that based off of what they told me they wanted, what they told me they needed. Then they said, well, how do you take a 5 to 7 minute speech and put it into a keynote that might be 30, 45 minutes, 60 minutes? Well, let me create that. And I created the Create Your Killer Keynote home study course. Then people like Les Brown and Willie Jolly, they said, well, Craig, I really like the way that you do the back of the room sales, because you do it with that swap formula. SWAP, SWAP stands for selling without annoying people, right?
Exactly.
Because what good is selling in the back of the room if you tick off the rest of the room? So I created that, mastering back of the room. So everything that I created was based off of my market telling me this is what I need. And I think one thing that I run into with speakers is they say, I want to talk about this, or I want to create that. And the question I have for them is, who asked you to create it?
Ah,
Right?
good point.
If nobody asked you to create it, then chances are there's not a market for it. So listen to your listeners, watch your watchers, and see what they want you to make. People said to me, I like the fact that you have all these products. How do you do that? I created the world-class product creation program. People say, well, I love the way you coached me. Can you teach me how to coach people? I created the certified world-class speaking coach certification program. So it's all based on what they want me to do. So I'm not doing the same exact thing I did 23 years ago. I realized that the road curved and I curved with it.
So, Craig, I'm just wondering, because you've had the ability to coach speakers throughout the world. Can you give me 3 elements? What really makes a good public speaker these days?
The number one key is to master storytelling. To be able to tell your story and make your point. And like I said before, instead of just speaking to be remembered, you want to speak to be repeated. So I'll give you an example. How do you do that? You tell a story, you make your point, you have a foundational phrase that's fewer than 10 words that people can't shake from their brains.
Mm-hmm.
So an example of that would be, I always tell people winning the world championship was a blessing and a curse. Because if you had been walking towards me in the Chicago airport 2 days after I won the world championship, you would have seen my wife on one side of me and me carrying this gigantic crystal trophy, right? Just walking through the Chicago airport, Wade, everybody's looking at me like, who is that? And Wade, you might not believe this, but I thought I heard a lady say, is that Denzel Washington? But this is what I realized my life would never be the same. This petite lady in a pink dress runs up to me in the middle of the airport. Everybody's watching. And she starts reading the bottom of my trophy. And she said, 1999 world champion of public speaking. Wow. Say some things. And I was speechless. But that's when I realized no matter where I go in life, people are going to say, would you mind saying some things? So that's when I came to the fundamental understanding about my life, and of course about yours too. I can no longer get ready to speak. I have to stay ready to speak. Mm-hmm. And my new motto, or my motto from that day on, was don't get ready, stay ready. And then you can take advantage of all the opportunities that exist. So Wade, when people hear that story, what are they going to walk away with? Don't get ready, stay ready. They're going to repeat it. They're going to repost it. They're going to tweet it. And I always tell people this: when you get the buzz, you get the biz, right? When people repost and repeat and retweet your messages, then other people say, we need that message for our organization. Let's find that speaker. Let's bring that speaker in. So it's very important to speak, not just to be remembered, but to be repeated. And you can do that with the use of a story and a foundational phrase fewer than 10 words. So I have a story file, I have a foundational phrase file, and they're always growing.
So Craig, you mentioned, because I have a lot of speakers that says, where do I get a good story? So how do you, and I've heard your stories itself, but how do you keep your stories fresh, but also how do you keep so that you can pull from a story instead of sweating about a story when you get a call from someone that wants to hire you?
I develop modules. So every major point that I make is its own module. It's about a 7 to 10 minute module. So if I have, let's say I have 8 modules that I give on a regular basis, mm-hmm. and a company calls me and they say, hey, we want you to speak on resilience. I'm going to bring each module, I'm going to bring like 4 of the modules that speak to resilience. And if they want me to speak on leadership, I'll bring 4 modules that speak on that. If they want me to speak on change, 4 modules. If they want me to speak on presentation skills, 4 modules that speak to that. So it's really about the advice that Mark Brown, who is the 1995 world champion of public speaking, said. Your stories don't have to be sensational. They just have to be sincere. Some of my best stories are ones that is just me and my family sitting around. I'll give you an example. Back in 2012, that was my favorite Summer Olympics of all time, right? Because it was in London. But the oldest participant in the Summer Olympics was a 74-year-old equestrian from Japan. 74-year-old equestrian from Japan. So my 7-year-old son and I are watching this on TV. And unfortunately, all the commentators kept harping on was the guy's age. Right? They just kept saying, he's 74. Can you believe he's 74? By golly, he's 74. Finally, my 7-year-old son looked up and said, well, how old is the horse? Right? And it just cracked me up. So about a week later, I couldn't get that question out of my mind. So I Googled it. And they had asked this man, they said, well, how long will you continue to compete? Guess what his answer was? He said, I can go on forever, but my horse is 15. And that's when I realized my son's question was much more relevant than I thought. And Wade, that's when I realized Ace, who you know, my son, he's been teaching me something for the last 16 years of his life about being remarkable, about being successful. Never stop asking questions. Never stop asking questions. So now that's a story, that's a point. Never stop asking questions. But think about that for a second. All I'm telling a story about is my son and me watching the Olympics, and he says something funny. And then I turn it into a point. So whereas these speakers are like, well, I never climbed a mountain and I never did this and that. So what? Tell a story about something that touched you emotionally or made you laugh or was a turning point in your life. Tell a story about your failures, your flaws, your frustrations, your firsts, and we'll relate to it. We won't relate to somebody climbing a mountain. We'll relate to somebody doing something that we normally do in our life. And
now, Craig, let me take you back to a point that you said that is so. Give me the 3 areas that you suggest. We've talked about this often, where you can find your great stories, your failures. I'll let you take it from there.
4 F's: your failures, your flaws, your frustrations, and your firsts. Normally, the first time we do something turns into a failure anyway, right? So people love those stories because they can relate to you. If you're just telling stories about, I succeeded here and I succeeded there and all those things, they're never going to relate to you. And their inner dialogue of the audience is going to be like this. Well, of course, those strategies work for him. He's special, but they won't work for me. One of the things I tell speakers all the time is you never want to come across as special. You always want to come across as similar. Because if you come across as similar to your audience, they'll say this, if Craig can do it, I know I can do it. And then all of a sudden they're inspired. And now all they need is a special process. And that's what I came to give them. They're going to want to get their hands on that special process. So remain similar rather than special. And that's another key to connecting with them.
So if you look, let's dive into something that I've always been amazed because they call you by the side. I won't release any of your real secrets. They call you Mr. Nuts and Bolts. And in your nuts and bolts, you make it so very relevant. Let's talk about your 9 C's. So if you can take us through the 9 C's itself, because I think that's of great value.
All right. I'll take us through a few of them. Because we can skirt over them. Well, let's take so when it comes to your stories, for example, you want to have a character, right? You want to have who are the characters in your story? And I'll give you a really quick example. Wade, what do you think is the number one thing that stands between most people living their dreams? What do you think that is?
Their fears.
Yeah. Could be fear of success, could be fear of failure, and so forth. But the number one thing is not what you think. You see, I used to work for an internet company, and I wanted to go full-time into professional speaking. That was my goal. That was my dream. Wade, you still have any goals, or you still want to do anything with your life?
Both hands.
Me too. So I went to the vice president. I said, look, John, I'm going to be leaving because it's always been my dream to be a full-time professional speaker. He said, that's your dream, Craig? I said, yes, it is. He said, well, that's great. I really admire you for having one, but you can't leave. I said, hold on now. What do you mean I can't leave? He said, well, Craig, we've been thinking about it, and we're going to raise your salary up to this. I said, but John, this is not a financial decision. This is about my dream. In fact, I call this a dream decision. He said, okay, I understand. I really do. But how about if we raise your salary up to this? I said, this is not a financial decision. This is a dream decision. Do you know, Wade, he raised it 4 times? I kid you not. He kept saying, we're going to raise your salary to this. I said, this is not a financial decision. This is a dream decision. He said, okay, Craig, how about if we raise your salary to well above $100,000? I said, dreams are overrated. Now, let's just stop right there, Wade. I don't want to tell the whole story, but let's go into a couple of the C's. So who were the characters?
Right.
Me, John, the vice president, and my wife. What does John look like? Most people will say a young David Beckham. Right? So what you want to do with your characters is you want to give them a hint so that your audience can see them. So I say a young David Beckham so that people can get that view if they know who, most people know who he is. But here's the question, Wade. Why don't I give the entire description? Why do I just give a hint rather than the entire description? Why don't I say he's a 6'2", he's got the black slick back hair. Why don't I give all that? Why do you think?
Well, naturally, you want the audience to draw the picture in their mind of how he looks itself.
That's it. That's it. If I do all the work, there's nothing left for the audience to do. And as speakers, we have to understand that people buy into what they help create. So I just give them a hint, let them create the rest of that mental picture, let them see him how they see him. It's very important, though, because Patricia Fripp, my speech coach back 15 years ago, she said something very important to me before she charged me. She said, Craig, people won't remember what you say as much as they'll remember what they see when you say it. So that's why we need to make these characters very visible. And then you can see my wife, the beautiful brown eyes. She's shorter than me. You could tell from the way the positioning is in the story. So anyway, we get our characters. But here's the most important part about storytelling right here. The hook to your story is the conflict. The conflict.
Yes.
The moment you introduce the conflict is the moment you hook your audience in. Because what do you think your audience wants to find out when it comes to the conflict? Or here's a better question for you, Wade. Why would conflict be the hook to your story?
Because they want to see, in my opinion, how you overcome that, how you deal with it, how did you go through it in order to learn. They might be having the same problem.
Exactly. Yeah. And they want to find out, what tools did you use? How did you get through it? And they'll be very inspired as long as we're remaining similar to them. So where was my conflict in the story? The moment John said you can't leave. And here's the key to storytelling. You want to establish your conflict as soon as possible. Sometimes even before the story begins, but as soon as possible, because the earlier you establish your conflict, the earlier you hook your audience in. One of the mistakes the speakers make, Wade, is they do what I call pre-ramble. They do so much setting up of the story that they don't get to the conflict early enough and they lose us. So get to your conflict as early as possible. But here's the other mistake that some speakers make. Once they establish the conflict, they fail to escalate it. We've got to turn it up. We got to make it worse. We got to make the water rise on the Titanic, right? If the Titanic just hit the iceberg and the water never rose on the Titanic, Wade, that would have been a terrible movie. So we need to make so you have to ask yourself when you're speaking, how can I make the water rise on the Titanic in my story? So in my story, it was he kept giving me more raises and more money. I kept getting more frustrated, more flattered, more frustrated, more flattered until something had to give. And that's where we get to the next C, which is the cure. The cure scene. Two things happen in the cure scene. Number one, you get a cure, right? You get a recipe, a formula, a toolkit, something that helps you overcome the conflict. If you overcome the conflict, sometimes you just have to transform the way you look at the conflict. But if you overcome the conflict. But the second thing that happens in the cure scene, and this is very important, there's a guru. Right? And the guru is the person, place, or thing that gives you the cure. Now, the guru can be a book, it can be a person, it could be absolutely anything, but the one thing it shouldn't be, I'm going to ask you why, Wade. The one thing the guru shouldn't be is you.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, man, I brought that story because realistically, you appear that you are special itself. And the audience doesn't connect that person that's always on the pedestal. They want to connect with you and send you are similar to them. So if you did it, why can't I do it?
That's it. That's it. It didn't come, this point didn't come from me. It came through me, right? A guru passed it down to me, whether it was a book or a historical figure or something that you heard from the past or somebody in your current life. The guru of my story was my wife. And I always laugh because there's a whole bunch of people trying to friend my wife on Facebook for motivation. Right? Because eventually she's the one who said your dream is not for sale. And she was, and I didn't sell out, and I went for my dreams, and I got it. So even though people didn't hear the rest of the story, she was the guru of that story. But the other reason why you shouldn't be the guru is if you were the guru, what are you doing in that conflict in the first place? If you already had all the tools, you already knew the answer, what are you doing in that conflict in the first place? So anyway, that's the cure scene. And then you get to the change. After you get the cure, you get to the change. So in my story, even though people didn't hear the rest of it, after I decided to go for my dreams, that year I spoke over 160 times in 44 states and 5 countries. And I'm happy to say I've been running my mouth ever since. That's the way. So that's the change. So what happens as a result of you receiving the cure? Here's the key, Wade. If you take them through the problem, take them through the payoff. Take them through the pay. And the payoff really needs to be bigger than the problem. Because if it wasn't, then chances are they might not follow you. So I let people know, yeah, I'm very happy with where I am now. And then they follow me. And then the next C is the carry out message, which is nothing more than the foundational phrase. So I'll turn to them and say, follow the words of my wife. Your dream is not for sale. And I did that, Wade, in India, Mysore, India. And the next day I woke up and there was a newspaper slid under my door, and I picked it up. It was a picture of me on the front cover. And the headline read, your dream is definitely not for sale.
Oh, wow.
And from that headline and from that article, I got booked to speak in Tokyo, which proves the point again. When you get the buzz, you get the biz. So we want to make sure we master our stories and master these foundational phrases.
So, Craig, I have a question here from the audience. Mrs. Dixon, I believe. She says, what are the areas that, let me see if I can get this. What areas should a conflict occur in? I guess she's talking about, and we talked about this years ago, what are the 3 areas that your character has to overcome? I think it's man versus man.
Yeah. Well, I wrote about this
that's where Mrs. Dixon is going.
Okay, I wrote about this a long time ago. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to elementary school. We learned about person versus person, person versus environment, person versus nature. But the biggest one is person versus him or her or their self.
Wow.
Yeah. Because really the conflicts that we go into, just like mine, whether or not to stay with this company or to go after my dream, is always going to come down to me, trying to figure it out with myself, which way to go. So the point is, though, just make sure you establish your conflict as early as possible, because that's going to hook your audience in. And sometimes you can do it even before, like even with Les Brown, sometimes you can do it before the story begins. Les will put something out there like, and this happened to me, and I can't believe it was the hardest thing I ever had to go through in my life. And we're like, oh, what? And then he'll get into the story. So the earlier you establish the conflict, the earlier you hook them in. Oh,
hopefully that answers Mrs. Dixon's question. Let me ask you, quick. So many speakers I see don't elevate their conflict. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, you have to escalate it, because if you don't, then think about watching a story, a mystery, and the suspense never builds, right? think about, I think I wrote about this in the Nuts and Bolts. Now, remember, I've written World-Class Speaking in Action, and a number of books since then. But I think I wrote about Charles Dickens and the ghosts that would visit Scrooge.
Yes.
Right? And think about, what if the same ghost just kept coming back over and over again? I don't think that story would be as effective. But no, there were 3 different ghosts. There was one in the past, one in the future. One. It scared them. But if the same ghost just kept, hey, boo again, no, you're going to be at that same level. I'm not scared of you. I already know you. So we want to just keep finding a way not to make anything up, but just remember how bad it got. Right? And in my case, in my story, the guy kept offering me more money, and I didn't know what to do. But here's another key to storytelling. Wade, do you think my wife had anything else to say to me during that time?
Oh, I'm sure she did.
She did. So here's a key. When it comes to storytelling, condense to connect. Condense to connect. My wife we had a whole lot of conversations, but I took the one thing that she said that stuck to me the most, which was, your dream is not for sale. Okay. Do you think other people had any advice for me during that situation in my life? Absolutely, but condensed to connect. I took everybody who was giving me advice and I put them into one person represented by my wife, because audiences connect to individuals more than they connect to a group. So condensed to connect. And here's the real piece where I condensed. That story in reality took place over 4 days of me coming back and talking to that person. Now, if I did that the way on stage, the way it happened in real life, it would be boring. And the next day I went back and he said this. And the next day I went back and he said that. And the next day I went. So what I did was kept the essential truth of the story, but just condensed it into one conversation so that my audience wouldn't be bored. So it's absolutely 100% true, but just condense it into one conversation. So you can condense people, you can condense time, and you can condense energy. And that's what I've done for this story. Because the more you start telling a story, the more you start practicing it, the shorter it should get. The shorter it should get.
So let me make sure I understand you, Craig. The more you practice it, the shorter it gets. Elaborate on that a little bit, please.
I coach people and they leave the coaching session with this fantastic story. And then next week when I coach them again, they came back and they added a whole lot to it. And now the story is not as effective. It's not as impactful. It's called addition by subtraction. It's not what we add to our story a lot of times that makes it better. It's what we subtract from it. It's what we take out of it. It's some of the things that we don't need. For example, the pre-rambling before we get to the conflict. You take that out. Now the conflict's on a whole different level. Best example of this I saw was my favorite story that I've ever seen came from Keith Harrell, Harrell, the late, great Keith Harrell. And he tells a story about stuttering. And when I first saw the story, he started the story off in his kindergarten classroom. And the teacher asked everybody to stand up and say their name loud and proud and picked him first. And he stood up and couldn't say his name. Right? Couldn't. And I was so wrapped into that story. And then when it came back around, it just was my favorite story of all time. So as a student, I looked back to earlier versions of that story. So I researched, I want to see some earlier versions of when he was telling that story years earlier. Well, guess what? He started that story off at his home, putting on clothes, getting ready to go to school for the first time. Then he talked about the drive to school. Then he talked about the big building. Then he talked about walking up all those steps and being so nervous. Wade, I know that Keith must have seen that and somebody must have told him, lop that whole beginning off. Take that whole beginning out and just start right before the conflict when you're in the classroom. Because when he had that whole other beginning, it wasn't nearly as effective. But when he started right before the conflict, that's where it just became mind-blowing as a story. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but there's a piece of advice that I got when it comes to storytelling that I always remember. Enter late, leave early. Enter late, leave early. And what that means is enter your story right before the conflict. We don't want all this pre-rambling. And then leave right after you give them the foundational phrase.
So, Craig, wonderful insight. Has speaking changed, seeing that we've gone to this new normal where no longer you don't get on stage and speak before people. Now you're speaking over the net. How has speaking changed, and should that affect the way that we use the C's that you've given us?
If you master storytelling, you're going to be fine whether you're on stage or online, right? The stories are going to come across. You might not hear your audience laughing, but you'll see them. And you'll need to look in the camera and make sure that you're connecting with them. So there's some technical things that you need to do. I'm not standing up the way me, I'm walking around the audience, I'm talking to people. So that's a little limiting. Yeah. Thankfully, we're coming out of it, but the story is still the story. And one of the greatest parts of the story that we have to start to emphasize, and Wade, this might be the biggest mistake that speakers make. They retell the story rather than relive it.
Yes.
And they retell it with narration rather than reliving it with a combination of narration and dialogue. So I'll give you a quick example. Some people don't like me, Wade, because I joined Toastmasters in March of 1998. I got my CTM in March of 1999 and won the world championship in August of 1999. Now, some people say, well, Craig, you don't even know what it feels like to lose a contest. I say, yes, I do. What people don't know is I lost the humorous speech contest at the club level. Yeah.
That's bad, but okay.
That's bad. I thank you for laughing at my misery. But I'll never forget a seasoned Toastmaster named Alan Mish came up to me afterwards and he said, Craig, you can win the world championship of public speaking. I said, what are you talking about? I just lost the humorous speech contest at the club level. He said, that's okay. He said, the only thing wrong with your humorous speech was that it wasn't funny. Now, let's stop right there. It's dialogue. You can hear what I say to Alan. You can hear what Alan says to me. I'm not retelling the story by saying, yeah, and then there was a guy named Alan Mish who came up to me and told me that I could win the world champ. No, I'm letting you hear it how he said it to me. I'm letting you hear how I responded to him. And here's the other thing when it comes to dialogue. You can't react to narration. You can only react to dialogue. When he says you can win the world championship of public speaking, look at my face. Like, what are you talking about? I just lost the humor. But you can't do that if it's narration. If I say, and then he told me I can win the world championship of public speaking, it doesn't make sense. So you've got to make sure that you're using a nice combination of narration and dialogue. So we not only hear what was said, but we hear how it was said. Sometimes people say things. I'll give you an example. I'm sure she's okay with this. I've been coaching a lady for the last couple of months who was she went through a really rough marriage. And one day her husband said, I want you to start cooking like my grandmother. Yeah. And so I want you to learn to cook like my grandmother because I don't like the way you cook. Now, look at her reaction that she has, right? So then she says, okay, and she went and called his grandmother and found the recipe and got the soul food together and made him a plate. And mind you, she's 9 months pregnant at the time. He comes home at 11 p.m. one night and she's 9 months pregnant and she puts the food on the table and says, I surprised you. I've done it. I called your grandmother and I put this together with the recipe she gave me. This is yours. And he took a bite and he looked at her and he said, this is disgusting.
Wow.
Do you feel that line? Yeah. Right? You feel that line because we can hear how he said it. We're not just hearing what he said, but how he said it. And then he threw the plate away. So that's the part that people really need to understand. If conflict is the hook to your story, conversations and dialogue, that's the heart. That's what pumps life into the story. So if you get into your story and you're in for a minute and you haven't had any dialogue yet, redo your story.
Got you. Good. Well stated.
Yeah.
Craig, I've got a question here. Mrs. Thompson says, how do I overcome fear? Fear of public speaking, fear of getting up in front of an audience. Okay. No other person better to ask than you.
First of all, let me just give a shout out to Deanna Spence, Spence. That was her story that I just relayed to you. I want to make sure that she gets a shout out. Deanna Spence. Anyway, I have a little bit different way of looking at it. I did do a program called Panic to Power.
Yes.
How to go from panic to power on the platform. And I'll summarize it in a story. I have a friend who asked me to, he said, I want you to speak at my wedding. I want you to sing at my wedding. Now, Wade, what do you think the first problem is?
Hopefully they didn't ask you to sing because I've heard you sing. It's kind of rough.
That's the problem. I can't sing. I can't. But some people say, well, why did he ask you? Because when I was a kid, I actually could sing. But sometimes when your voice changes and so forth, so I could. But the second problem was I wasn't assertive enough to say no. So I'm stuck singing at his wedding. So what I decided to do was fake like I wasn't nervous. I said, you know what? I'm not nervous. I'm not. And so, there's that, you get to the wedding and there's always that room that the groomsmen are in.
Exactly.
The wedding, and there's always like a door in case the groom wants to leave. but anyway, we're in that room, and all the groomsmen are looking at me saying, "Are you nervous? Are you nervous to sing?" I said, "Me? Psh, the kid? Come on now. I played basketball in front of 18,000 people in college. You know, I'm nervous. Come on now, come on." Wade, that music started playing, and my breath left me.
Wow.
I didn't know where my breath went or when it was coming back, but I can tell you one thing. If you can't breathe, you can't sing. And I know people are thinking, well, he got over it and sang the song and this and that. No, that was the worst wedding song in the history of wedding singers. But and keep in mind, this is supposed to be his only wedding, right? But I learned the lesson from it. You can't fake out your nerves. You have to embrace them.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to thank them for being there because they're actually there to help you. And if you start fighting your nerves, guess what? What you focus on expands. So if you start fighting your nerves, what's the focus? Your nerves. They're going to overtake you. But if you say, okay, my nerves are here, glad you're here to help, and you focus on your message, you focus on your audience, chances are your nerves can't hurt you. So let's fast forward to when I get to the World Championship of Public Speaking. There are 2,000 people in Chicago, Illinois. I'm on stage. There are two big jumbotrons on each side of the stage. So if there's anything in my nose, it's going to be magnified 1,000 times. Like, you think I was nervous, Wade?
Oh, man. Yep.
More nervous than I've ever been.
100%.
But I decided to accept my nerves. And I went out there and gave the speech better on that day than I ever had in rehearsal because my nerves weren't in rehearsal, but my nerves were there on the stage that day. So one of the things I say to people is a couple things. There's a 10-to-1, what do we call it? 10-to-1 phenomenon. What kind of things happen to you physically when you get nervous to speak, Wade, or happen to other people?
Oh my goodness. You start to sweat. Heart starts to pound like a drum.
Mm-hmm.
And realistically, you want to do the fight or flight routine.
That's true.
That negative conversation in your mind asks you, do you want to stay or do you want to exit?
That's right. Now, here's the 10 times phenomenon. What's happening inside of your body, whether you have sweaty hands or whatever, is 10 times more than what the audience can pick up. Right? So most of the time, even if you feel like you're really nervous and your voice is trembling, most of the time the audience they won't even know. The only time they'll know is if you say, "Pardon me, I'm nervous." And now we're all nervous for you. So just understand the 10-to-1 phenomenon. What's happening inside of you is 10 times more than what the audience can pick up. So that should make you feel better. But the other thing I do to make sure that I can work with my nerves rather than against them is I flip the script on my nerves. There are people right before I speak who say, "Craig, are you nervous?" I say, "I hope so." "Oh, I sure hope so." Because if I can be glad that the nerves are here, I'm going to connect with that audience way better than I will if the nerves are not there. In fact, the times that I failed as a speaker have been the times where I just wasn't nervous at all. Yeah, I need those nerves. And so for the person who asked that question, you understand the 10-to-1 phenomenon, flip the script on your nerves, and accept your nerves. And last but certainly not least, your confidence is going to be on the far side of preparation. The far side of preparation. People say to me, "Well, you're so natural." This naturalness is on the far side of preparation, not on the near side. It's a lot of preparation and practice that goes into coming across as natural. Because Wade, you know my story. I was the least likely person to be any kind of speaker. I grew up being called Daffy Duck because of the lisp that I had. And now I'm a world champion and a professional speaker. So it's on the far side of preparation.
Wow. Yeah. And I wish we had time to go into that story, man, because your story, I did a little take on your story. We'll talk about it sometimes. But I tend to say, doesn't matter where you come from. It matters on where you want to focus, you want to go. And your story is a part of that. Craig, for our audience that is naturally built up of speakers, you talk about practice. Give me some tips. Give me some tools or techniques. How do you practice before you take your presentation before a live audience?
I make practice as realistic as possible. So it's not something where I'm reading any type of script. I never write it down anyway. I have maybe a graphic organizer. I don't know if you can see it, but it's just circles that have my major points in it. It's like an outline. And then
yeah, you're still a bad drawer, but that's good.
I didn't win the world championship of drawing, right? But I'll take those and I'll practice as if I'm in front of an audience. I'm seeding the spontaneity. I'm asking questions, figuring out what I'm going to get as an answer, responding to those answers, having a dialogue, just like I'm in front of a real audience. But here's the real key to rehearsal, Wade. You shouldn't always practice from the beginning. You should practice from the middle of your speech. You should practice from the end of your speech. I have 4 R's to remarkable results, for example, for a keynote. Sometimes I'll start practicing with the 3rd R. Or sometimes I'll start practicing with the 4th R. I don't always practice from the beginning, because if you do, you're going to have what I call a slope speech, where the front is really good and the rest of it kind of trails off, because you start practicing and then life happens, you get interrupted. And then when you go back and practice again, you practice from the beginning again. So I like to practice in modules. So if I have my 4 R's to remarkable results, I'm going to practice reality. I'm going to practice that 7 to 10 minute module earlier today. Later today, I might practice relinquish, which is another one of the 7 to 10 minute modules. Later, I might practice rely on the vision. And so I practice in pieces. I'll practice in modules. That way I don't get bored, really. And no part of the speech is weaker than any other part. But practice. And then here's one last thing. I almost always have at least one mental practice where I close my eyes and go through the whole thing and see my audience. Okay. So you can do what I call be there before you get there. I'll close. Like a couple of weeks ago, I knew I was going to Miami to speak at a special type of engagement where there were only going to be 10 to 15 people in the audience. And I knew I was going to be speaking in a living room setting. So I had to picture that. I had to imagine it. I had to go through the whole presentation in my mind. And then when I got there, it felt like I was at home. And that's what you can do with your own preparation.
No, we talked about once, and before you won the world championship, you used to always say, win it in your mind first, if I'm correct.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I won the world championship is because I envisioned myself on that stage at least 1,000 times. So again, by the time I got there, I felt like I was at home and everybody was my guests, right? It felt like deja vu. I already been there before. That's French, by the way. It just felt like I'd been there before. So I asked people, what stage are you stepping on mentally at least 1,000 times? Because indeed, Wade, if you do the mental work, I feel like you will get the real world reward. Got to step on that stage mentally. There's an inner game to public speaking, just as there's an inner game to anything else. So yeah, win it in your mind first. Be there before you get there.
So let me nudge you, Craig, and also push you. A few years ago, the toughest audience I had to speak to was a blind audience. And it really made me dig deep itself to bring my skills to another level to connect with them. What's the toughest audience you had, and how did you make the presentation go to be a success?
All right. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what country it was, but I was in the Middle East. And I didn't understand that I was going to be up on this grand stage, and the closest person to me, there are probably 600, 700 people in the audience, but the closest person to me was probably 100 feet away.
Wow.
That's where the front row was.
Yeah.
And I wasn't used to that. And the room was so big that you couldn't really hear the laughter reverberating off the walls the way you normally do. And so it just felt like I wasn't connecting. And I went through the whole speech, and I frankly, I didn't turn it around that day. I just went through it, and I trusted my training, and I put the focus back on them rather than on me. Because before I take the stage, I say, may I forget myself, remember my speech, and touch my audience. That's my mantra. May I forget myself, remember my speech, and touch my audience. So I got off the stage and I finished. First of all, I did end up jumping off the stage and I ran up closer to them. I don't know if that was culturally correct or not. But years ago, when I came back, everybody was speaking in the spot where I did. So maybe I left a legacy there. But I thought I didn't do well. And then when the next speaker came up, you know what I thought, Wade? I hit it out the park. I hit it out the park. That speaker was okay. But the response I got, I just realized, oh, that's just how this audience is. It's a little bit reserved, and you have to take into account the environment and the room and this and that. And then when the three speakers were done, this is not to brag, but everybody ran up to me. And I said, well, I guess I did connect. And I'm glad I didn't take their the lack of what I thought was energy as a sign, because especially the kids who were there ran up to me. And it was one of the best moments of my speaking career once I realized that that's just the way that audience was. So then the next times I've come back to the Middle East, I've always remembered that, and I've felt the connection right away. But I never had an audience that was visually impaired. I've never had that.
Welcome to the Craig Valentine training. That's when you have to dig real deep to make yourself not the presenter they want to hear, but what they need to hear in order to bring them to another level. So
yeah, that's right.
It's different.
Now, Wade, can I give them a place to go if they want to see me?
You're right on target. Yes.
All right, because I always ask people, I say, raise your hand if a year from now you'd like to be at least 3 times better than the speaker you are today. All hands go up. I said, well, great. For absolutely free, for no fee, you can go to one of my websites, which is 52speakingtips.com. That's 52speakingtips.com. And every week for a year, you're going to get an audio lesson from me. And by the end of that year, you will be at least 3 times better than the speaker you are today. So I hope to see you there. And Wade, that's also one of the mistakes. If you just see that was a little sales pitch, right? Even though I'm not selling anything, even though it's free, it's a sales pitch. And one of the mistakes, I got to get this across, one of the biggest mistakes that speakers make is not realizing that they're in sales. They're in sales. When you're in speaking, you're in sales. And the best speakers embrace it. The ones that are least effective avoid it. And the sad part, Wade, is you only have to master one formula. And this is it. Never sell a product, always sell the results. Never sell a service, always sell the results. If you're in leadership, never sell an idea, always sell the results. If you're in leadership, never sell change, always sell the results. What if you're going for an interview? Never sell yourself. Well, I have 15 years of experience. Nobody cares. Always sell the results. And I'll give you a case in point. I'm old now. So
we want to embrace that, but okay.
You can see decades and decades ago, I went to buy my first car ever in life. And I went to the dealership, and the salesperson came up to me. He says, "Are you looking at that car?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Great. Let me tell you about it. This car has this type of brake, this type of motor, this type of engine, this type of wind." What's he trying to sell me, Wade? The car.
Yeah, he's trying to sell you a car.
Right? And I just said, never sell the product, always sell the results. So I said, "Thank you, but no thank you. I'm not interested." So I went to a different dealership, same day, different salesperson, same exact car. Now, Wade, this guy must have anticipated where I was mentally at that time of my life. I was young and single and looking to mingle. And so he, feel free to use that one, by the way. So he walks up to me and he said, "Are you looking at that car?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You're going to look good in that one." He said, "Yeah, man, you're going to be flying down the road. The wind's going to be blowing through your hair. And the girls, let me tell you, the girls will be all over you." Wade, what do you think I did?
Where can you sign?
I said, "Where do I sign?"
Yeah.
I said, "Where?" He made the sale, not because he sold me the car, but he sold me the results. And Wade, he lied. I was lonely in that car. Yeah, just me and my payment.
I just want to know how many tickets you got, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say, well, you should have known he was lying when he said the wind was going to be blowing through your hair.
I didn't want to touch. I won't tell him bold jokes. We both are the same.
When you first came for that first coaching, you were telling a story about embracing being bald. And I still remember that. And that's 23 years later. So guess what? You told an impactful story that I still remember, that's still touching my life, that I now can even more relate to.
But it's physical now. So Craig, you've done this for over 20 years now. So if you took a vision because of the people you've trained, because you've been in the industry, in the next 5 years, where do you foresee the speaking industry going?
I think it's going to be a hybrid of online events and in-person events and online in-person events. So for example, Ed Tate and I are going out to Chicago to do an event. Ed Tate is the 2000 world champion of public speaking. We're going out to Chicago, which is where I won the world championship, to do an event. And it's hybrid. There'll be people there and there'll be people online. And so you're going to have to know how to address both, right? And I gave a program to a health organization maybe 6 months ago in person, but it was also hybrid. And so I had to make sure that what I was saying to the audience, I also could look in the camera at times and say to the audience that was all over the world. And so in one case, getting this Zoom experience over the last couple of years will prepare you very well for that hybrid type of event. And find a way to be creative with it, right? Find a way to do activities that you can still have them do if they're not in the room, and get them and keep them engaged. So that's where I see it going. But Wade, it's always going to go, the spoils are always going to go to the people with the best stories. That's just never going to change. And in Bible times, we call them parables, right? It's not going to change. If you have a story and you have a point that people can take and remember and repeat and apply to their life, you win.
Oh, good point. Good point. So let me put you on the spot, my friend, and stretch you. You tend to say this is your, I don't want to say calling, but your mission or something. If you look 50 years in the future, Craig Valentine has getting ready to hang up his shingle. What do you want the people to say about you?
I really would like for them to say more about themselves than anything about me, because I'm not in this for me. Like, I'm really in this to touch lives. Even if they put on my tombstone, he touched lives, I'm okay with that. But it's not really about what I want them to say about me. It's what I want them to say to themselves, and what I want them to say to their children, and what I want them to say to their grandchildren. And that's the advice that my wife gave me. No matter how good the people are trying to give you great things here and there, just remember that your dream is not for sale. Your dream is not for sale. So maybe they can put that on my tombstone, right? But also, I'm not sure I want a tombstone, Wade, because I'm claustrophobic, so they might have to cremate me. But if they can remember not me necessarily, but the legacy that I'm leaving, which is your dream is not for sale, then I think my job here on Earth has been worthwhile.
Well, man, it's always great. We're at the top of the hour. It's always a great pleasure to touch bases with you, to catch up with you, because you always have something that elevates the audience to another level. You've given that. So before I leave, and I always give my guest a few minutes, if you would give out your contact information again and the offer that you're giving of your 52 speaking tips one more time, please.
Yeah. Again, if a year from now, if you'd like to be at least 3 times better than the speaker you are today, visit the free site. It is absolutely free. No catch. 52speakingtips.com. That's 52speakingtips.com. And I'll just leave them with this, Wade, if it's okay with you.
Yeah.
We talk about winning it in the mind first. We talk about be there before we get there. It couldn't be more true for me, because in the mid-90s, I was an events planner. And one of my responsibilities was setting up the stage for speakers. So I don't know if you can believe this. I always wanted to be the speaker, but I'm setting up the stage for these speakers. So I'm going into these ballrooms. I'm taping down cords. I'm moving chairs around. I'm putting the lectern up front. I'm moving more chairs. They used to call me the chairman because I used to move so many chairs. But Wade, it never failed. Every single solitary time I walked into one of those empty ballrooms, I would walk up front. I would stand behind the lectern, and I would imagine that one day audiences would show up to see me. And I always had the same thing that I said to myself way back then. And I knew I would tell this story one day. As I stood behind the lectern, I'd always say, today I move the chairs. Tomorrow I move the audience.
And you're doing that so well today.
Thank you.
No, man, thank you. Thank you for being you. So, guys, we're at the top of the hour. Craig, as always, you bring the thoughts, you bring the insight, but also you bring some sizzle. So thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Wade, and thank you for putting me on this path. I appreciate you. And anytime you want me back, I'll be back.
You stay by your phone. We're having you back. So, ladies and gentlemen, there you are, Craig Valentine, 1999 world champion of public speaking. But don't think of him as just the champion. He's the gentleman that can help you move your speaking skills to another level. That's what we do on Elevate. So I want to invite you back in the next few weeks where we have another person that can take your skills, your talents, and abilities to another level. Don't pivot. Pivot won't do it in these times. Let's elevate you to another level. This is Wade the Moore Guy. Look forward to talking with you soon. Have a great day. Remember, elevate yourself to the next level.